Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Jenny Dearborn, Chief People Strategy Officer at BTS and author of The Insight-Driven Leader. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, watch our videos on YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. We are a listener-supported podcast, so please consider becoming a patron. If you'd like to support the podcast by becoming a patron, you can find a link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for being a listener. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization. I don't know if we ever had an eating podcast, but the ASMR people will love it.
ASMR, what's that mean?
Isn't that the people who listen to like weird sounds to like relax themselves?
Oh, I don't know. That's funny.
Yeah. One of the things that you find out when you host a podcast is that there's like audio files out there. I am not one of them, but like there's people that are very like sensitive to sounds or they find sounds to be soothing. It like you learn about a whole new world.
Huh. Okay.
Because we used to not care about our audio quality. Our audio quality would be terrible. And the number one complaint I would get would be from audio files. Like, I love your podcast, but I cannot stand your audio.
I mean, it's like okay. Crackly or something like that?
Yeah. Or you could like hear people like breathing or coughing or whatever.
Yeah.
And like that drives some people up a wall.
Yeah. Sometimes I just look at my husband and I'm like, God, do you have to breathe so loud? Damn it.
We're leaving this part in.
Right.
Well, Jenny, it was really good seeing you this week at Transform, but it was good seeing you this week, and I was delighted. I was actually searching around in my pantry. I could not find it. I apologize, but for the delightful jar of honey you sent me,
I do.
And I found out an interesting thing about you, that you are a beekeeper.
I am.
And so how does one get into beekeeping, and where did that come from?
It honestly started because I have fruit trees in my backyard, and each year for a bunch of years, they would flower but make no fruit. And I was not smart enough to be like, why aren't my... And so I was talking to somebody and they were like, dumbass, you don't have bees. That's the problem. Oh, so then I was talking with somebody at work at SAP and he goes, oh, I'm a beekeeper. Shout out Roger Quinlan. And he said, I'm a beekeeper. I'll bring hive over and I'll put it underneath your apple tree while it's flowering. And then that year, and then he would like left it there for 2 months and then he took it away. And that year, tons of apples. And I was like, okay, I need bees. So it started with lack of apples. And now I have tons of hives and they're amazing. And all my neighbors are like, oh, thank you for having bees. All my fruit trees and all my plants are doing so beautifully and all that stuff. So it's like a gift to the neighborhood, basically.
Yep. Now they have apples too, and it's all because of you.
That's great. I want a commission.
You should get some. Well, speaking of commission, I believe has it come out yet? But your new book, The Insight-Driven Leader.
Oh, speaking of commission, like you want a commission right now for plugging it?
No, I'm thinking about because I'm going through the whole author thing right now, and I realized, there's like a commission or a royalties, I guess is what they call it.
I don't know
for the book, but yeah. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the Insight-Driven Leader and your prior works in terms of like, I feel like you have a whole data-driven series.
I do.
Of HR books that I've been a fan of for quite some time.
Oh, that's nice of you. Data-driven came out in 2015, and that's specifically about sales and how to measure sales productivity and all of the variables that you take into account when doing that. 3 years later was the Data-Driven Leader, and that's specifically about measuring leadership, all of the knowledge, skills, behaviors, competencies, habits that the best leaders do and how to measure them in your company because it's different from company to company. And what are the algorithms that you create to be able to measure and predict leadership performance? And then this one is across the entire enterprise. So it's called the insight driven leader. And the idea is it's the insights that come from the data. It's like how to move beyond just the number. It's 7. You're like, I don't know if 7 is good or bad. Is 7 good in this industry or in this market or at this growth stage, all of that stuff. So it's how to understand and create insight from the numbers that we create in HR. And the premise really is that all business problems really are people problems, and that a lot of the times leadership does not bring HR into the picture to be able to weigh in with metrics that say this strategy or this, pivot is a good idea or not based on the competencies and skills and capabilities of our workforce. And so I was excited about this one because there's 35 case studies in the book, really where, HR is the hero of the story because the business is half cocked going in one direction with like, we know what to do. And then HR is like, hold on, if you were actually ask me, here's all the data and the metrics to prove this is a good idea or not a good idea or whatever. And plenty of examples of the business asking HR for an analysis. HR gives the analysis, business disregards it, business goes off and makes the wrong decision. Business comes back with tail between their legs, says, I'm sorry to HR, and says, now I will listen to you. So just kind of like how to navigate that.
Well, we'll definitely put a link in the show notes for people to be able to purchase the book because I feel like you versus almost any other leader in the field, and feel free to take issue with this framing, but the way I see you is you're a business person turned HR person. And many CHROs of today or of ever, frankly, almost none of them are analytics native or data native. And I see you as being a data person first and a business person second, and then an HR person third. And so can you talk about what that, and again, feel free to take issue
I'd
with
say
the
business person first,
okay, fair
then
enough.
data, then HR. But yeah, because I was an English major in college.
Yeah,
Like,
fair enough.
I was a high school drama teacher. And then you know, then I went into the business and, rose through the ranks in sales. And then, as a fully fledged adult with all, having already given birth to all my kids, that's when I went back to night school and got an MBA at
Yeah.
night while I was working full time because I was like, I need to get a heck of a lot deeper into data analytics and building out financial models and stuff.
So what's the difference between you being an analytics native CHRO and non-analytics native CHROs? And how does that shape how you approach the business, its leadership? How does HR run effectively? Feel free to go whatever direction you want there.
Yeah. I think there's actually lots of us, that are CHROs that are very strong in analytics. The people who came up through compensation and especially executive comp,
Yeah, dealing with the board.
dealing with the board with executive comp or just overall compensation or sales comp, that can get pretty touchy and complicated. So I think those folks are super strong. And then there's plenty of CHROs who came into HR kind of late in their career. They started in, whatever consulting, a couple years at McKinsey, then they went and got an MBA, and then they had whatever 10 years in finance or something like this. And then somebody kind of taps them on the shoulder and they come horizontal over to HR in the top role, CHRO. And there's lots of examples of people like that. So I think they're very strong in business. And then there's, they get themselves up to speed on the HR side. So, it can be frustrating for people who came through the ranks in HR when they're, losing the top job to somebody who has no HR experience. There's plenty of people would say that, that's bonkers. But I think it sorts itself all out in the end. But I think there's lots of folks that are strong in analytics.
Yeah, I think I'll come back to probably that point in one of the articles we'll cover later. I want to take a quick detour though. You mentioned, I actually didn't know this, that you were a theater major in the past. And I'm pretty sure you hold the distinction of the only podcast guest that we've ever had that has an IMDb page.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Are those things related, like, in terms of your passions? Like, I know you said you have a family of artists, and you yourself believe a lot in, the film industry and being able to express ourselves in those ways. Are those things related?
Well, I mean, I got into film because I'm number 5 out of 6 kids. One of my older brothers, I have 4 brothers. One of my older brothers is an award-winning Hollywood writer, director, producer person, and I'm close with him, and every once in a while, he'll hand me a script that somebody sent him, and he goes, "Oh, you might think this is fun to read," because he knows I like film. So he handed me a script that was an independent movie looking for financing. And so, I read it and then I call the writer and say, I'll invest if you're looking to put together a group of investors. So that's how there was like 85 people who invested and we raised $7 million to create the Lily movie that is.
Yeah, did they debut it at Transform,
They
or I
didn't
wasn't
debut
sure?
it. We had our world premiere. It's starring Patricia Clarkson, and I'm one of the executive producers of that, so that's on my IMDb page, but I didn't do anything other than write a check with a lot of zeros and like painful zero. That's it. I didn't do anything other than write a check for that. I wrote a check in 2020. We had the world premiere October of 24. It's working its way across the country in film festivals. May 9, it has its theatrical release in major markets and then to streaming after that. And I did bring it to the Transform conference and we did a couple screenings and I had the director and one of the film characters on the stage, and we talked about the film.
Yeah, that's about the famous Lilly Ledbetter Act and Lilly Ledbetter's life, correct?
Exactly, yeah. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act that Obama signed in '09.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I don't know if this is a hard pivot or a soft pivot, but related to that is I think about, you mentioned doing interviews for your book when we were prepping for this, and I think I was actually one of those interviews. I don't know if I made the cut or not.
I did.
So we'll see. But that was sort of a harrowing experience unto itself about kind of what's been going on in HR right now, and what are reactions to, others in the business, like the CEO or, folks that are working with HR, to like what's going on right now and how we add value. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I had, hundreds of interviews for the Insight Driven Leader, and I talked to CHROs, CEOs, board directors, especially those who lead the comp committee, which is like aligned to the HR function, just like audit committee sort of babysits the CFO. Other thought leaders and authors and academics and professors. So a huge range of folks around the world. And the theme really was, I mean, there's a lot of themes, but the theme really was that HR is on its back foot. HR has the capacity to be incredibly strategic and impactful, but is really sidelined by the leadership, by the CEO. So, HR is fully capable of being that strategic business partner that is very data driven. But if they find themselves not being as impactful as they like, or sort of like, just asked to plan the holiday parties and whatever, it's typically the CEO's expectations. It's the misalignment of the expectations between what the CEO wants and what the CHRO can do. And the question I started with was, what is causing the disconnect? If there is a disconnect, what is causing the disconnect between the CEO and the CHRO and the corporation and the HR function? Because a lot of CHROs say, I'm sidelined, I'm not listened to, I'm stuck in administrative trivia, space, and the business is doing things that in an uninformed way because they won't listen. And so I was like, well, why is that? Like, what's going on? So that's really the nature of the research, and the book kind of maps out the best practices to be impactful.
Your average CHRO, and should they be able to analyze a balance sheet, perhaps, right?
Yeah, of
Like
course.
and and is there a delta there? I remember one of the things that you told me when prepping for this is, talking to a CEO who said they never met an HR person who could analyze a balance sheet. Like, and having known quite a few HR people in my career, I don't know very many that could, but I think if I spoke to them about it, they would say, "Oh, that's not my job." Right. And I'm not talking about CHROs perhaps, but people that are, leaders, mid-level leaders in an HR function. They would say, that's not really my role. I don't really need to know how to do that. And the question I have for you is, do they?
They they do. It really comes down to what are the expectations of the CEO? Because
Mhm.
if you have a CHRO who, is just as deep in finance as they are HR policy, they see the executive team making all sorts of decisions that, put the people agenda at odds with the best practice for, bringing value to the company. And you can see that play out in the balance sheet. I don't think that CHRO is going to stay. I mean, where there's the research we found is where there's a disconnect between the CHRO and the CEO in terms of the expectations of the CHRO's role,
Mhm.
that it's when there's that disconnect, that somebody quits or somebody's fired. You have a CHRO that has too much horsepower and too much capability and wants to be in meetings, and the CEO is like, why do you feel like you need to be invited to these meetings? I don't need you.
Yeah.
Kind of stay in your lane in a nice way. Then that CHRO is going to say, why am I here? I'm going to go find another company that appreciates and understands the value that I bring and wants me to participate at that level. So that
Sure.
CHRO is going to quit. Or if you have a CEO that's like, okay, HR, what do you think about the balance sheet? Like, what should we do? And HR is saying, like, oh, I'm just here to make sure that everyone gets paid on time, then that CHRO is going to get fired. So whenever there's a disconnect, it's fired or quit. Most of the time you have great alignment. It's just, do you have great alignment at the strategic level or do you have great alignment at the administrative level?
Yeah.
It's not
How do
right or
well,
wrong. It's just like, what are you're just you're missing out on opportunities if it's only administrative. That's all.
that's fascinating. And this isn't the direction I was thinking we would go, but how do you get that alignment? Like, how do you create that alignment with the CEO or with other C-suite members?
It's a lot of conversations
Yep.
up front, and, a good CHRO knows how to tease that out, ask those questions. What are you expecting? What do you want me to do? In a perfect world, what role do I play? What data do I have access to? How often am I reporting and analyzing? What meetings do you want me in? What kind of advice are you going to ask me for? That's it's a long process to get that kind of alignment. Sometimes it's magical, but to your first question, should every CHRO know how to read the balance sheet? Of course. And you're basically starting with the corporate metrics, revenue, margin, markets, growth, things like that. And you work backwards and say, well, what do the people need to do at this company? What are the knowledge, skills, behaviors of each role? And how do all of those roles interact? And what is the workflow of who does what in these roles? And how does that align to the most important business metrics? A lot of times we are, reporting activity metrics. We had
Yeah.
this many people take a class, this many people were hired, this many people were quit, whatever, as a percentage of the workforce or something like that. But we don't enough say if that's good or bad.
Well, a lot of about the ways of showing those linkages to how HR activities link to, the bottom line and things like you mentioned, like data. A lot of that comes from, especially now in 2025 and onward, from HR technology, right? And how HR is operating and how technology is enabling their way to operate and do it more efficiently. What One of the things that you said to me in preparation for this is that it's extremely important that businesses have a strong commitment to HR technology. What does that mean, and especially today and as we look into the future?
Well, HR traditionally has been a very administrative and human, intensive function. And really the way to recruit the best employees to come into the HR function is to promise them a future that is not slogged down with administrative tasks, right? Someone who is the best and the brightest coming out of an MBA program doesn't want to go into a function that's cutting and pasting spreadsheets together. So you will, as an HR leader, you will increase the quality of your new hires coming in with the use of the best technology. You will have less spend overall, in terms of your workforce. There'll be fewer errors and more ability to have predictive analytics that can, prescribe actions for the future. So, in the world of AI and everything that can be done with that new technology, but also sort of just taking back, a macro view. There's not enough humans in the world to get all the work done that needs to get done. We've got a declining birth rate and aging population, a shrinking overall population. Humans have to do the work that only humans can do. If you are, having a human do something administrative that can be more easily done by technology, that's a waste of a person. And we don't have enough people to get everything done that needs to get done. So use technology for the bottom third, push your humans up. We don't have a problem of not enough jobs or not enough people. We have a problem of not enough alignment of humans to the work, the higher end work that needs to get done.
It's interesting because I agree with all of that. And we've published some research at my organization about the rising storm, and it's a lot about those demographic shifts in the population. I wanted to say thank you to you, actually.
Why?
Well, because, for all intents and purposes, 6 months ago, we were strangers. We had never met before. And we had this interview for your book. And then you were just so kind and generous. You recommended me to a book agent and gave me a bunch of advice about writing a book, which actually led to me of having written one now. And I attribute a
You
lot
wrote
of
a
that
book
back.
in 6 months?
Yeah, I know. I'm
Oh
an
my
insane.
God, it took me 18. God damn it.
But
Okay.
you recommended me, and things I realized about you is more than I think maybe anybody I've ever met in my life. You have a superpower of reciprocity,
Oh, you're
and
nice.
and I really mean that because we talked for I don't know 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then you recommended me to this really prestigious person in the industry, the book writing industry, and I was like, wow, this is life changing for me. And then all of a sudden I get a Christmas or a holiday card from you, and I sent you one back.
Yep.
And then you send me a jar of honey,
Yeah.
and I'm just this whole relationship. I'm like, wow, Jenny is just next level at this stuff. And so I just wanted to say thank you to you, first of all. And two, I really admire that about you. Is that how did you come by way of doing that? Is this just something that comes natural to you?
I just like people. I don't know. You're embarrassing me. I don't know what to say. I like giving gifts. I like receiving gifts, not fancy things. Just I like, that, you ever taken that quiz, the love language? And
Never have.
you haven't. You should. It's fun. You and your wife should take it. It's there's 4 love languages, and one of them is I can't remember what they are. It's not inappropriate at all, but one of them is acts of kindness. Like my husband won't on our anniversary or something like that. He won't give me a gift, but what he does every week is he takes my car and gets it washed and brings it back. He never says anything, and I'm just he was so acts. It's one of those things. It's called acts of service, and
Yeah.
that's his love language is fixing things in the house that get broken.
Okay.
And then I like to give little things, and
Yeah.
that just is what I enjoy. So yeah, I like having a big group of friends because I like to give things away to people, and I just think it's nice, especially when it's homemade.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some more of this stuff. So,
Okay.
would you mind joining me in Cole's Corner?
Sure. What's that mean?
Welcome to Cole's Corner. So this is kind of related to things on the personal level for you. So the people who are on audio can't see this, but the people who
Okay.
are in video can see that you have a wall of superhero things that I believe you painted
I've
yourself.
yeah,
Is that correct?
I've painted all of these. I mean, I'm not the original artist, obviously, like Stan Lee and da da da, but I copied them out of I pencil copied them out of comic books and then painted them. Yeah.
They're very good for those who are listening only. And it's very impressive too, because like last time we talked, you showed me there's literally a whole wall. It's not just these four.
Yeah.
It's insane. Oh wow,
Mhm.
that's brilliant. Well, I do have I have a few rapid fire questions for you, but the first one is related to this.
Okay.
And it is, which is the best superhero? And I'm going to choose the ones that I see.
Okay.
So we've got Captain America, we've got Superman, we've got Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, and I think there's a second Superman, so I'm not going to say him twice. But why? Which one of those is best and why?
Well, Wonder Woman, obviously, because she's an Amazon, and I'm an Amazon, and so I relate to her. I'm 6 feet tall, and I love superheroes because they represent something so like pure in our culture about fighting for the underdog and doing what's right and fighting against injustice and fighting against corruption. And it's more about the symbolic role that they play in society and what they do for people, sort of lifting them up when folks feel despondent. And in the comics, I'm not as much of a fan of all the movies, but I do love reading all the comics, and the sense of hopelessness that people have and despair, and then how a superhero kind of comes out of the blue and can lift a person up and save a person at their darkest moment. There's something intrinsically just so inspirational and beautiful in that. And when I was a kid, I really resonated with that idea and wanted to be saved and things like that. So
Oh,
that's
that's
kind of why I love them.
yeah, that's very sweet. All right, next question I have for you in
Okay.
rapid fire. What is the best type of candy?
Well, I think it's Reese's peanut butter cups, pretty sure.
Oh, I totally thought you were going a different direction with this.
What?
The slam dunk answer was Pez.
Oh, no, I don't like the candy at
Oh,
all.
you don't like the candy?
No. No. I throw it
So why
away.
do you have so many Pez dispensers?
No, I get the Pez dispenser and I chuck the candy in the trash.
Oh, I thought that was the candy thing.
No,
Okay.
not at all.
So
No.
explain. So
You're
you
this
told
is
me you
you
have
want another
800 Pez dispensers.
it sounds like you'd like another field trip here. So I've got 750 Pez or something.
I assumed it started with the candy, but that was just my own assumption.
No. Assumptions kill, dude.
That's, yeah, you know what they say about assuming.
An ass and somebody's an ass. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. What's the place you have never been that you would most like to go and why?
Oh,
Ooh.
God. Well, if you go onto my LinkedIn page, I've actually listed every country I've been to because
Mhm.
a couple people and I are like tracking them against each other. I've never been to Russia, but hell no, I'm not going until a whole lot of stuff changes. But from a history perspective, I certainly would love that to go and see that. Where have I never been? I would love to do a World War II history tour that of
Mhm.
like major sites and battles and historical events that happened throughout World War I and World War II because I've read a lot about it and I've been to those places. I mean, I've been to this like Berlin. I've been to like capitals, but not to the specifically to the sites of important battles. So that's kind of a dream to be able to do that. World War
Yeah, I
II.
remember last time I went to Amsterdam and went to the office, there was this big kind of earthen made wall that was just extending down the road. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because it's a really low lying area, a lot of water,
Sure.
all that. And I said, what's that? Why is that there? And they said, oh, that was from World War II. that was a trench that they built. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, I never would think that like just, a earthen structure would still exist to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an interesting tour to go on. So the last rapid fire question I have for you, I ask every one of the guests on the Cole's Corner is, why do you do what you do?
I was born in 69. So I grew up, formative years were in the 70s and early 80s. And my dad had an undergraduate degree from Stanford, another degree from Berkeley, and an MBA from Columbia. And he, in the 70s, was out of work. And I remember him applying to be a mail carrier and him being rejected because he was overqualified. And, our family struggled financially and we were on hard times. And I remember, eavesdropping on my parents talking about my dad's work and how he felt mistreated by his employer and his boss. And there was 6 of us kids. So how my dad was treated by his boss affected my parents' marriage, our household, our lives as kids. It affected my psyche when I went to school. It affected my relationships with other kids at school whose parents were financially successful when my parents were struggling. And I just really got into my bones about the impact of a company on the employee. So every employee you have, you should think of them, your head count is not just 1, but like 10, right? It's their family, it's their extended family, it's their community, it's whatever. And so you have an obligation to be a good manager. There's a special place in hell for bad managers and bad leaders who make their employees' lives anything other than joyous. It is a privilege to be a manager. And if you're not the best in the world, you should quit because you're affecting generations of people. People in the United States, we identify with our jobs. We identify with our employers. And, so much more now that the infrastructure of like people going to church less often and less, community groups like Kiwanis or whatever, Rotary, and all of those other things that people used to do to create community, those are going down.
It's like the bowling alone, Robert Putnam stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we used to have all of these things where we got our sense of self and our sense of worth and sense of community outside of work. And job was just a job, like, oh, but I do all these other things. And now it's like your job is so much who you are, and it's not right, but it is where we are in our society. And that just means the company has an obligation to our society to be good and kind and supportive and do the right thing for the employees. And when you don't, you're fucking going to hell because there's just, I mean, the damage that you do is tremendous.
You've hit on a few things, like you talked about loneliness earlier in the podcast, and then you just kind of tied back to it a little bit a second ago, talking about, a company, like where someone works might be their only linkage with society,
Yeah.
and like it's fascinating, but it's also sad at the same time that
Incredibly
we've
sad.
kind of gotten to this point as a country or a society. Because
Yeah.
I don't think it's just in the United States. And I think especially coming off the heels of the pandemic, there's like this epidemic of loneliness. Like I remember seeing charts. I wish I had one pulled up, but like charts of how often people went outside, like literally just left their home,
Yeah.
and then what it is after the pandemic. And even though, the pandemic has kind of faded, the rates are still, there's this huge divergence between how often people went outdoors and met with other people pre and post pandemic. And so it's just like what work might be the only thing that gets people out of the house sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't, maybe power isn't the right word, but influence that corporate leaders have is incredibly impactful in a
Mhm.
society. We used to have respect in government, respect in institutions. And as those go down, if the president, whatever, Joe Biden tweeted something, people would go, not even notice it. But, Tim Cook, people are like, oh, wow, this celebrity CEO idea is very powerful in the United States. It's not so in other countries. But, there's a lot of influence that people that work in corporations have.
Absolutely. Well, I've got one big question for you. So one of the things that I said we would talk about today, but we didn't cover it earlier, is advice you would give to early career people in HR. So the big question I have for you is, if you were early career today and you were hoping to be a CHRO someday, what would you study in school, and what jobs or experiences would you get that you think it would take to get you to the CHRO of tomorrow?
Yeah. CHRO tomorrow, I would say, this is crappy advice, but the best thing to do is to leave HR and come back. The best advice, if you want to be a CHRO, if you had, you started in HR and you're like, this is interesting and I like it and I want to make an influence and do something bigger someday, take a rotation into sales for 3 years, or operations or marketing or anything, product, anything, and then come back to HR with broader experience. You'll come back at a higher level, right? So you could even take a lateral from an HR generalist to a finance generalist, I don't know, whatever. And then, do that for a couple years and gain so much more visibility, experience, seeing the exact same things from a completely different angle. And then when you come back to HR, you can come back at a higher level. And
what do you study in school? Do you even go to school?
Yeah. But I would study, business. You could do, I'm a huge fan of double majors, so psychology and economics, things that are opposite. And, sociology and finance, or,
Theater and business,
theater and business, or, one of my kids is a astrophysics and Spanish literature major. He's 2 months from graduating. So, and I just,
you have an impressive family, by the way. I'm not going to out them on the podcast, but I'm reading through this. I'm like, geez, all these are going to be like Nobel Prize winners.
No,
someday.
that's hilarious, but no, they're just regular kids. But I did drill into them, like, you need to be working on both sides of your brain. And, that's what's going to make you successful and stand out, is that you will have the emotional intelligence to be able to work with people and communicate, and critical thinking, and problem solving, and cross-cultural awareness, and all of these human skills, collaboration and leadership, to be able to pair with a STEM, something, to be able to put them together. That's the superpower, is outsmarting your AI by doing both.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move into the section we call What Am I Reading? This first one is, and one of the things I wanted to say thank you is, there's this new trend of folks who will take academic articles and then summarize them for the lay people on LinkedIn and post about them. And so there's this academic article published in 2020 that kind of got lost in the fray of the pandemic, called Training and Organizational Performance, a meta-analysis of temporal, institutional, and organizational context moderators, which to the normie, like most people are, means nothing.
What does temporal mean? Like something with your temper?
Exactly. It means time. It's a time variable.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I didn't know that.
And so friend of the podcast, Neil Morelli, summarized this article talking about the 119 studies of different training and showing how training impacts a company's bottom line. So this is what we were talking about earlier in terms of being able to analyze a balance sheet.
Yeah.
Now, you would have never gotten that from the journal article title. But one of the things that they found was training, regardless of the quality or quantity of the training, had a positive impact on organizations' performance. And one of the things that they found was that, and this is the temporal component that you mentioned, is that the relationship between the training and the organizational performance actually strengthened year over year. And it was present regardless of the industry, company size, or the technology that was used to do the training. And so
what
knowing that
strengthened year over year? You said it
Right.
strengthened. What is it that was strengthened year over year?
The relationship. So let's say, I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say there was a point 0.2 correlation in 1980 between training and organizational performance. By 2020, it's 0.3, right? So that it strengthened over time. And so first of all, I wanted to ask, is this type of finding relevant to a CHRO, first of all? But second of all, have you seen this manifest in the real world?
Yes, I've seen that manifest in the real world where corporations have a very long-standing learning culture, and when they do, they are better at recruiting, retaining, getting young talent, early talent. They develop a reputation and a brand for developing others. Something like GE in the 90s had such a strong brand reputation for development that people would take a lower compensation package to go to GE, and it meant something really real in the industry. If you say, "Oh, I started at GE at this level, and in 10 years I had 5 promotions, and I went through all these training programs to go from one level to the next," and then you end up as a VP, and then you go someplace else, people are like, "Oh, that means something very specific because GE had such a strong reputation as a learning culture and development experience culture." So yeah, it means a lot because you can get the best talent. I mean, really the best talent wants to be in a place that will grow and develop them. The smartest
Yeah.
people are not about like, I want to have the best salary right out of college. The very, very best talent are the ones that say, I want to be at a company that's not just going to be good to me today, but is going to be good to me and help me grow and advance and change.
That's a really good answer, especially not for having read the article. So well done. Good job there, Jenny.
Oh,
All
thanks.
right. Now, the next one I have, and I'll do my best to summarize it, is previous guest on the podcast, Mark Efron, the CEO of the Talent Strategy Group, wrote an article about the boxing match that sometimes you see between HR COEs and HR business partners. And it's called HR versus HR. Let's stop the fight. And the premise of it is that a lot of times COE talent will come up with HR programs that are based in science or based in best practices and bring those to their HR business partners, who will then give a variety of reasons for saying, my business unit is not ready or doesn't want or doesn't need this initiative at the time. And I'm doing my best to summarize a whole lot here.
Yeah, no,
But
I get it.
basically, what?
I know, I get it because it's a tale
It's a
as old as
tale as
time.
old as time. And so he gives his recommendations for how to settle this boxing match. But my question for you, Jenny, is have you seen this manifest before? Where do
Oh,
you come
God,
down
yeah.
on it? And what are your perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, it's tale old as time, and it doesn't go away. I mean, I saw it in the 90s and the zeros and all the way to today. The best thing to do is rotate people in and out. COE leads into HRBPs and back. You know, it's and then there's also like within a COE having purists that have always, that have deep expertise, especially in something like comp or something like that. Like having your whole career in comp, sometimes you need someone who has that depth. But also, not everyone in the comp function or not everyone in learning development should be there the whole time. You need people who go back and forth between the COE and the HRBP, into the business, back to the COE, things like that, so that they can design programs, but they also understand reality and they know how to communicate. And just be careful when you're screening people to work in your HR team. Like, look at their resumes and you don't want people that have only done that. And I've seen a new role in the COE come up recently, and I think it's trying to address this ivory tower disconnect between COEs and HRBPs, which is the learning and development business partner. So it's like a business partner that's on behalf of the COE. And so it's based on the title. It is specifically between HRBPs and the like learning and development, content creation
Yeah.
factory. So it's a learning and development business partner, and their job is to translate. And so in a way, it's acknowledging the disconnect, but in a way, it's also making it worse because you're not having
Yeah.
the people in the COE learn to talk to them,
Well, so let me ask you about that. So, from your perspective and your experience, is that a wise move or is that a wasteful move? Because are you just replicating an HR business partner, but in learning and development, or your learning and development folks should become more HR business partner centric? Or do you think that that's really wise because it's boundary spanning?
Org design happens as a reaction to fix something that's broken now.
Yeah.
So if it's broken now and you feel like you need that role now to address it, go for it. Is that the right thing to do in the long run? It sort of goes a call back to the topic a while ago. Like, is it a smart thing to pull in somebody that has no HR experience, that grew up in the business and had all this time in finance, and pull them over to be the CHRO? Well, if you need that, do it. But then it would be nice if the person that came after that was internally groomed from the HR function. So if you need a bridge role because you're stuck, put that bridge role in, but make sure that you're not creating an org chart that's, set in stone, and that you've got HRBPs who have done a rotation in a COE and COE leads that understand how to talk to the business. I would say in the long run, it's not a good idea.
All right. Last article. So in October of last year, the Department of Labor published a paper on the best practices that employers can use to decrease the legal risks associated with using AI in employment decisions. And there is some lack of clarification because of executive orders that have come out since then, whether or not these are still applicable, but that has not been clarified. But for the time being, let's assume that these are still applicable.
Okay.
And so they give 8 principles for our best practices for guidance on using AI for making decisions in the workplace. And I'll just read through the heading. So the centering around worker empowerment, ethically developing AI, establishing AI governance and human oversight, ensuring transparency in AI use, protecting labor and employment rights, using AI to enable workers, supporting workers who are impacted by AI, and ensuring responsible use of worker data. And so I want to put this to you, Jenny. Do any of these stand out to you as a CHRO? And how are you thinking about the use of AI in terms of making employee related decisions in the workplace?
Those all sound good. I like that AI helps but doesn't make final decisions. That it is a tool for synthesizing huge amounts of data. If you have 1,000 resumes, it can take it down to 100, and then, or 50, and then a human can speed through them from there. You never want your AI making final decisions.
Well, can I dig into that for a
Yeah.
second? This is one of the things that we've kind of bandied about on the podcast a bunch. Is there ever a case, and it could be like the smallest, most minute decision, but is there ever a case where we want to have AI making decisions formally in HR? And if so, what would that be?
Well, put it back as a question. What are the places in HR where we are notoriously bad for making biased decisions?
Yeah.
And we could train an AI to be more objective than us.
The way I think about it, like let's play with this for a second. Is I think of like payroll, right? So somebody
Yeah.
starts new with an organization and they give payroll their incorrect information. Now, no human is looking at that. And so the person misses a few paychecks because they gave payroll the incorrect information. And perhaps if you had AI in the loop in that process, they would automatically be auditing that information and could create like a prompt to someone to fix it. But do you need a human in the loop to validate that prompt to make sure that that person gets paid? Or would that just be considered a net good in terms of AI made a fully sound decision without a human in the loop?
Well, I'm a little nervous about agentic AI that
Mhm.
is making those final decisions. I like the idea of AI constantly screening for human mistakes and then
Yes.
flagging it to a human, like in payroll or comp when, you know, I've been in a couple companies that we've done a huge compensation analysis to say, are we paying women and men fairly, and doing an analysis by gender, by age, by ethnicity, all of that stuff, and then spitting out a big report that we have to action.
Yep.
And it would be a heck of a lot easier if there was just something every day monitoring and, so you don't have to do a big, one time get everybody right.
Yep.
And if it was just always tweaking and flagging and, making incremental corrections, that would be fantastic and save humans a ton of work and time and effort of fixing big problems.
I think because it seems like to me, and I really appreciate you bringing that perspective. It seems like to me, everybody wants to start with like the biggest problems in history and let's have AI fix them. It's like, why don't we start with some small ones? Let's get some wins.
Yeah, some wins.
Let's do some things that maybe it's really good at and not see if it's going to fix all of society with one fell swoop.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's just the
No,
practical part.
I think it's super practical, and also it's a way to get people comfortable with it. Like, people are freaked out about, whatever robots taking over their jobs, if they just see something small along the way, it's not so scary.
Absolutely. Well, Jenny, I know I've been extremely complimentary to you through this episode, but I'm going to continue to be. I think that you are wonderful, and I really appreciate you joining the podcast. Before I give you the final word, is there anything that you would like to share? Like, is there anywhere people can find you or find the resources? Again, we'll share them in the show notes, but any final words for our audience before we wrap up?
The book is available for pre-order in any place where you can buy books online. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, all those things. It ships June 17. I did put a thing on LinkedIn that
Look at
if
you.
you, Jenny's Backyard Honey, if you pre-order, and then I have a bunch of small jars. If you pre-order the book and send me a notice, I'll send you a jar of honey from my bees in my backyard, because my ladies in the backyard, they make 50 gallons a year, so it's a lot. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. It's
No,
just
well,
book
that's go
and
find the
honey.
insight-driven leader. You'll get some of the best honey you've ever tasted. It is homemade. I can validate that. And thank you so much for being a guest today, Jenny. You're fantastic. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott, and today's guest, Jenny Dearborn. Thanks for joining us, Jenny.